So without further ado, Kemi Ilesanmi, the Executive Director of the Laundromat Project, which is a New York-based, POC-centered organization which advances artists and neighbors as change agents in their own community. Kemi has previously worked at Creative Capital Foundation and the Walker Art Center. In 2015, Kemi was appointed by the Mayor of New York to the New York City Cultural Affairs Advisory Commission. She's on the board of the Joan Mitchell Foundation and the Broad Room, and is also a Sterling Network Fellow. Since 2005, the Laundromat Project, or as we call it, the LP, has directly invested $1 million in over 165 multiracial, multi-generational, and multidisciplinary artists, in addition to 80 innovative public art projects and a creative community hub in Bed-Stuy, New York, while engaging over 44,000 New Yorkers across the city. I'm very excited and pleased to welcome Kemi with us here today. Hello.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for all the work you do. So we'll kick it off. You know, I read some somewhat dire statistics in the opening, but I want to start off on a positive note, and you're the perfect person to do this with. The LP has had many successes this year, and you've made some incredible announcements, including a Capitol building project in Bed-Stuy, which represents a move that will unify all your activities under one roof for the first time since the founding of the organization. So given what has happened over the course of 2020, I'd love for you to tell us how you're accomplishing these successes, how you're doing it, and what is most resonating with your donors and community stakeholders throughout this year.
Indeed. I first of all want to acknowledge that it has been still a difficult year, even within this, and particularly because so many of the statistics you refer to are some of our peer organizations, right? So I'm still in community with a lot of folks who are very much trying to struggle and navigate through this moment, as are we. But at the same time, for us, we had already been in process with a strategic planning process that in which we had already dreamed of this goal of having a singular space. We had two spaces across the city in the Bronx and Manhattan, and we wanted to be in one, and it was in Bed-Stuy. And we actually identified this new home a few weeks before we understood what COVID was. It was here, but we didn't yet know. And so we signed our lease at the top of COVID and made that decision within that. It was still emerging, we weren't quite sure. And I've been so grateful that my board really supported that and that we leaned in as a staff, because it's really given us something to dream for and to be activated towards manifesting. And we spent the year listening and growing and building. And we were able, speaking about success, we were able to keep all of our staff employed with no furloughs and no cuts to salary. We were able to keep our major programs going. And we, in fact, were able to add on a few things that were in relationship to this moment, supporting artists, which is what we do well and best. So for us, a lot of that, we work with artists of color, we work in communities of color. We do work that's community centered, and the local is the new everything right now, because we're always, all of us are most able to access the things we can walk to. And the LP was already the kind of organization that was in community in that way. So I think that was something that really resonated. The work we do felt relevant to the moment, but it was what we had always done. We didn't have to make any shifts. What we in fact did, and what I think this moment has really pushed us and so many other folks towards, was our own sense of purpose, which was to serve and to be in community and to give resources and et cetera to folks of color, communities of color, artists of color, in the neighborhoods of New York City. And we were able to do that work even more deeply in this context.
Thank you for that. And you make such a great point about your mission and staying true to the mission of artists as change agents. And one of the key pillars of AFF is that we need to update the narratives about the arts to highlight how artists are change agents and how the arts can facilitate global change. This is something that we'll be talking about throughout the afternoon today. You've said, and you mentioned relevancy, you've said previously that, quote unquote, reckoning is about relevancy. And the title of our discussion is how the arts can rebuild communities. So Wonder if you can tell our audience here, how do you see artists making change in the communities, some artists that you've supported and partnered with? Can you cite some of those examples for us?
Absolutely. So we've been doing this work for 15 years. This is our 15th year anniversary, in fact. And we've worked on projects that deal with issues of housing justice, food insecurity, and issues around that, a lot around wellness, which feels so relevant in this moment, and legacy building and placekeeping. So we had a history of really engaging with issues on the ground through arts and creative means. And an example of how that came to be even this year is that we had, at the beginning of the year, pre-COVID, the before times, we had announced the 3 projects we were supporting, and one of them was a project in Little Manila, Queens, which is where we have a large population of Filipino Americans. And we were working with 2 artists, Dina Diente and Jacqueline Reyes, who are both Filipino American. And they were, when COVID struck, they immediately were able to pivot their project, which was about connecting small businesses and Filipino artists, into a little kind of mini residency matchmaking thing. But they were able to pull back, continue to work with the restaurants in particular that they were already planning to work with in Little Manila area, and instead raised money, think about a mutual aid circle, where they then used that money to buy a series of Sunday dinners for Filipino American healthcare workers who were working at Elmhurst Hospital and various other healthcare facilities around that neighborhood. And each of those dinners, which is a way of taking care of the people who are taking care of us, which has a large proportion of Filipino Americans working in our healthcare system, each included an art project. And so again, kind of recognizing that people were still human, even in the midst of crisis, and should be invited to be in touch with their creativity, even in the midst of crisis. And that's what they did for the first 3 months of their project. And then they took from there and actually went back to that original idea in the summer after that spring period, and were able to return to something that was closer to the original project, but pulling in all of that information, all of those relationships into the rest of the project. The other thing I'll mention quickly that we did this year, and we launched about very early April, so again, really early in the COVID moment, we launched a creative action fund supporting artists in this moment to be artists. So a lot of our artists, and lots of artists everywhere, lost jobs, lost income, insecure housing, et cetera. And we really worked hard to connect them to resources that, and people and CBOs and organizations and government agencies that could help with those crises. But we said, we're going to talk to you and relate to you as artists. And we're going to ask you, what do you want to make right now in the middle of all of this? And how can we support the making of that? So we actually gave out mini grants, and people did concerts, and all of this online, of course, and meditation projects and healing projects and dance projects, all of this online. But we said, we're going to look at you as artists, and we need you as artists right now in the middle of what was COVID, and then of course the racial uprisings and reckoning of the summer. And there was something really powerful about that, and that we heard back from them, that they were allowed to create in this moment and be supported in that creation.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to pull out 2 threads from what you said and kind of combine a couple questions I have, because 10 minutes goes by way too fast, and you're going to have to come back and hang out with us. This idea of people support and this idea of wellness. I was really struck by something you said in an interview last month with Artsy, that it took many years to figure this out, but I wasn't an objects curator. I was a people curator. I like relationships. And when I hear you talk, the focus that your organization has on people and the people-centric work that you do, especially as it relates to wellness, is a system that prioritizes people. And we need to reshape our funding around that. So to kind of lead off of that, because we just have another minute, relating to wellness and people, I was also super into a recent post that you had on the LP Spin Cycle blog called Invest and Rest. You talked about your upcoming 8-year anniversary with LP and your 50th birthday next week. Happy birthday. And on the occasion of both, that you are off for a 2-month sabbatical. I'm wondering if you could end us off today with your talk about telling us more about the need for rest and reflection, about slowing down and being thoughtful as we navigate the challenges facing our sector, especially in community work, people-centric work, and working with communities of color.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And I'm very much looking forward to 2 months to rest, to reflect, to recharge, and to think freely with no prior need or deadline, I should say. And wanting to provide that for our staff was something we wrote into our policies newly, obviously inspired by other organizations as well as academia. And for us, wellness is so central, and it really connects to this idea of listening and then taking that listening to action. And how can you, when we listen very deeply, we ask a lot of questions internally, externally, in different relationships, and then we look for ways to act. And one of the things we hear over and over is this need to slow down, to have time to vision, to have time to rest. And that's something we decided to write into our policies in a number of different ways. We have a health wellness fund for our staff, but one of these was like, actually, if you stick around for 7 years, we'll pay you your full salary for 7 weeks of think about whatever you want to think about, and then come back with all of that recharged energy to help keep pushing the work forward, which is our mission and our purpose.
Thank you so much. Thank you for leaving us on that note. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for being here. Enjoy your 2-month sabbatical and happy birthday. We'll talk to you soon.